professor of politics and history at the University of Bologna. I'm teaching in a program in English on East European Studies, and I'm teaching the state building and modernity in Eastern Europe and foreign policy of Russia and Soviet Union. Sometimes I'm also teaching history of the Balkans. I have published several studies and books, and I have also worked with the ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia, because they asked me as an advisor to assess the evidence that they have collected and to give my personal opinion about the quality of the assessment for preparing the charges against allegedly criminals or crimes that have been committed during the war. So this is, you see here then the title of the topic that I'm going to discuss with you. This is post-war Balkans and the failed reconciliation, because one of the key points that I could say in this content is exactly that for the moment reconciliation doesn't exist in the region, and there's no way that in a foreseeable future reconciliation can be achieved. The question of failed reconciliation is one of the key aspects about the future of the region. This is clearly connected to the post-war events. And well, I wanted to show you just this map for, let's say, starting the lecture. Why? Because this is a lecture, this is a map that can show you, at least partially, that distribution of the population before the war in 1991. And according to the colors, if you see, for instance, a full green color or a blue-green color or violet color, this means that the population at that time was more than 50% in that area. So this means that in this area, more than 50% of the people were Croats. Here, more than 50% were Serbs. In the green areas, for instance, here, more of the 50% were at the time called Muslims, now Bosniaks. Here you have the brown, the 50% more were from Montenegro. Here you have more than 50% of population Albanians. Here in Slovenians, where is white? This means that no one group, national group, achieved 50%. No one. Now, since I said just 50%, this may be not necessarily means that they were 80% or 90%. This might be only just 51%, and the other 49 were other groups. So this is the reason why this map gives you just a general idea of how the people was spread into the country before the war started. And this shows you how intermixed was the population, particularly if you consider that there was a high level of interethnic marriages. And this was another aspect that played a crucial role in the mixing of the population in the region. And since we are going to speak about reconciliation, it's obvious that we are referring particularly to the area of former Yugoslavia. Although it is true, I wanted to stress this, that if Yugoslavia fall down in a bloody war, in a series, I would say, of bloody wars, not just one, other countries also suffered a lot for a collapse of the institutions. Albania, for instance, in 1997 had a deep crisis that was stopped only because Italy intervened together with the European Union to reconstruct the institutions of the Albanian state. And Bulgaria as well had a bigger crisis in 1996 when there was an assault to the parliament by angry population and the opposition because of particularly of corruptions and mismatching of the political context. So the area suffered from lots of problems and difficulties, but there are no doubts that this area was the mostly deep and divided society. And this explains to you why the question of reconciliation becomes so crucial. Well, what is the background? Why we are speaking about reconciliation in this case? Because the background is set up by different points and different way how the policymakers present the reality to their own populations. For instance, just to give you an example, Croatia and Serbia had conflicting war aims. What does it mean that territorially, both the country were interested to expand and to change the borders of the republics as they were established by from the administrative point of view during the Tito's time. Their own main interest was to divide, in particular, Bosnia and Herzegovina. For the map that you have seen just before, just to show you again, the map, Croatia was interested to take the control of a part of Bosnia. You see here Croatian population living in Bosnia, plus here and there as well, and the Serbian population living in Bosnia as well, also in northern Dalmatia and in this area. So this means that they wanted to redraw the map, and so they had, from this point of view, conflicting war aims, because it was clear that it was difficult for them to decide how to divide the country. And actually, they created, this was before the beginning of the war, in March 1991, after a meeting in one of the villas, Tito's villa in Karađorđevo, there was a meeting of the president of Serbia and the president of Croatia, and they appointed a commission of 6 people, 3 Croatians and 3 Serbs, in order to decide how to divide Bosnia, so to take the maps. And these people met for several months, at least until the end of the year, 1991, and they were unable to divide the country. So this is because any division of the country implied pushing out population from the territories, either because you had to move this part of the Serbs on the eastern side, and to move the Croatian on the other part, and what to do with the others, the other groups that were living there. So this is just to explain, for instance, one of the key issues, why conflicting war aims. And I insist on that because, for instance, in the narrative of the Croatian government today, even today, they will deny this, and they are denying that they had this war aim about Bosnia and Herzegovina, but not only for political reason, but as a scholar, I'm sure what I'm saying for the simple reason that a friend of mine, Croatian, was in the commission appointed by the president of Croatia for dividing Bosnia. So I know very well that they met for several months in order to divide the country. They were unable to do that, and this also led to several crises within also the leading party in Croatia during the war about this issue, because there are people that disagree deeply with the politics of the president of Croatia. So, if you are then interested into the details, I can enter into these details. But I wanted just to make clear that the background that makes reconciliation so difficult is problematic for several reasons, because the war aims were conflicting. because the peace treaties that have been achieved were conflicting, and I will explain why, and because the international intervention, and I don't speak here about international community, I'm speaking about international interventions. I will explain what does it mean, played a role in a context where nobody accepted to be defeated. All of them were pretending to be winners of the war. This is something, for instance, just to make clear, that is, we are speaking of a context that is deeply different from the end of the Second World War, when it was absolutely clear that Germany and France and Italy lost the war in Europe. There was no discussion about that, even for the Germans and for the Italians. For the Italians, so and so, I have to say. 50-50, okay. But for the Germans, no way. This was not the situation in this case, and I will explain to you why conflicting peace treaties. Conflicting peace treaties for a simple reason, that all these treaties were, let's say, negotiated, if not imposed, by external subjects. These external subjects were mostly the European community at that time still, and the United States of America. This is the reason why I'm not speaking about international community, because international community implies the Security Council, and that is also Russia and China, which were marginalized during that period. So they played a marginal role. Particularly Russia, which was interested. This was the time of Yeltsin, but this was very problematic for Russia to play a significant role in this context. So all these agreements were negotiated and imposed to a certain extent, also by a military intervention sometimes of the Western side. For instance, in order to achieve Dayton, NATO bombed the Serbian positions around Sarajevo, and then, before achieving let's say, the agreement of Kumanovo that was connected to Kosovo, to the future of Kosovo, Serbia and Montenegro were bombed by NATO. So this is the reason why I'm saying that they were negotiated, this is true, but they were also imposed by military force. And they are contradictory by themselves. If you look these 4 agreements, well, Dayton was concerning Bosnia. Bosnia was divided into 2 entities within a very general framework. So you cannot speak about a state of Bosnia-Herzegovina unless you cannot say the Republic of Bosnia-Herzegovina, or you can even say Kingdom of Bosnia-Herzegovina. You don't have a name. You can say Bosnia-Herzegovina. Then you have to enter into the details about the 2 entities. One is a federation, but not all Bosnia-Herzegovina is a federation, and the other one is the Serbian Republic, the Republika Srpska, which is a centralized entity. So 2 entities which lead the idea that you might consider Dayton Agreement both as a first step for dividing definitely the country, or the first step for reuniting the country. This was interpreted differently by the local policymakers. And this explained to you, Dayton was to a certain extent like Kumanovo, when the NATO intervention imposed to Serbia and Montenegro, that Kosovo would have been detached from the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, as it was called at the time, under the control of the Security Council. This was and this offered at least a possibility to Russia also to play some role from this point of view. In a sense, what is the message of Dayton and Kumanovo? Is that, in a sense, you recognize in a written way that Bosnia is one state, and even that Kosovo was part of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, because this was reported in the 1244 decision of the Security Council that led to the follow immediately the Kumanov Agreement, stopped the bombing. But actually, what happened was that could have been interpreted as division, which is exactly the contrary for Ohrid Agreement, which was made after the short war of Macedonia. In this case, in Macedonia, when the war began between the Albanians and the Slavo-Macedonians, the Ohrid Agreement established that you could not divide the country. There were no entities, as the Albanians were asking, like in Bosnia, but the state remained united with a decentralization in the municipalities. So the agreement in Ohrid was to preserve the unity of the state. The Dayton and Kumanovo left open the possibility to divide or unite. And Belgrade Agreement was the agreement between Serbia and Montenegro. It was negotiated by preserving a sort of unity of the two countries, not by chance that was called at that time the Serbian-Montenegrin state, like the Austro-Hungarian Empire, if you want, more or less. But then they also included a referendum, and after a few years, during a referendum, the 55% of the Montenegrinian voted for independence, and for this reason, in the end, the Belgrade Agreement collapsed. So, if you look from this point of view, what is the message that diplomacy launched to the region? A mess. It was a clear, there was no clear message what we wanted to achieve. Even if Yugoslavia collapsed, the successor state would remain within the borders of the administrative units or not. As you can see, even from the legal point of view, the message was confusing. And this was politically interpreted by the different subjects in different way, according to their own political interests. This is why the international interventions were unable even to cope with a reality where no one accepted, for several reasons, to have lost the war. Despite of the fact that in Croatia, for instance, the Croatian leadership insisted that they won the war, this is not exactly correct. Why? For the simple reason that the war aims, as I explained before, were different than the result achieved. The result achieved was Croatia would have remained within the administrative borders of the Tito's time, while the war aim was to expand Croatia to the detriment of Bosnia. So if you look from this point of view, even in this case, Croatia didn't win the war. But they are insisting that Serbia lost the war. Yes, it's true that Serbia lost Kosovo, de facto lost Kosovo. There are no way. But at the same time, Serbia would never accept to be the loser of the war from the political point of view. And so also because they said Serbia, in the narrative is that Serbia was not militarily involved into the war in Bosnia. Actually, there were the volunteers that were sent there, or volunteers approximately. Not always they were so willing to go, but anyhow, there was not formally the army of Serbia involved into the war. By contrast, the Croatian army was involved into the war, as it was also recently confirmed by one of the decision of the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia, when they sentenced General Praljak. Probably you read that he killed himself, he poisoned himself. It was exactly because in the decision it was reported that the Croatian army occupied part of the territory, entered into Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is, by the way, also admitted by a general of Tudjman in a famous book of his memoirs, Janko Bobetko, wrote about that explicitly by reporting even the copies of the documents that he received by the president of Croatia that invited him to enter with his army into Croatia. So this is something that was known. But this is just to explain the background, which is very confusing and doesn't present a clear picture. Now, this is the background that explains to you how many unsettled issues remain to be negotiated into the region. For instance, unsettled borders. Well, you know that these borders are unsettled even between two EU member states, Slovenia and Croatia, because there is a quarrel in this moment about the possibility of Slovenia to enter into the international waters that, according to the borders, doesn't allow them. They have to go through the Italian waters or through the Croatian waters. And so they had a different interpretation about also the land territory, few kilometers. The land territories should change. For this reason, Croatia and Slovenia in this moment are in a deep diplomatic crisis. Originally, they accepted an arbitration, an international arbitration, but then this arbitration failed when Croatia discovered that there were some contacts between the Slovenian authorities and the judges. So Croatia withdrew from the arbitration, but the arbitration continued because Slovenia supported the arbitration, and in the end the arbitration decided in favor of Slovenia. Croatia doesn't recognize this decision, and now there are lots of tensions. Anytime the fishermen went out with the boats, because according where they are in a country or in another country, but actually they are in the water of the European Union. So this is explained to you what is so problematic. And this explains to you why also Juncker recently mentioned the fact that there are no possibility for including new member states into the European Union unless they have settled all their own border disputes with their own neighbors. But the problem is that in this moment the topic is within the European Union. Well, it's not the only one, by the way. I have to say that there are at least another unsettled border, because now Juncker said about the Balkans, but actually I would like to remind you that there is an unsettled border between Spain and Great Britain because of Gibraltar. When you speak, not by chance, with Spaniards, they, for instance, will very clearly state that Serbia could join the European Union even without a settlement with Kosovo. Because they did the same with Great Britain, because for them the Gibraltar issue is unsettled. Which is not the opinion of the other member states, but doesn't matter. This is explained to you the situation. Cyprus is another example. Northern Cyprus, the Turkish part of Northern Cyprus is not recognized as a republic by any of the members of the European Union. So formally, Cyprus, all the island is within the European Union. But it's not true, because actually only the Greek part is within, and the other part is not. So this is just to explain that even within the European Union, there are some key issues that shows you how problematic is the problem of the borders. Then with the borders you have refugees, you roll I am explained right now, refugees, because you have peoples that moved from one region to another, and in lots of situations they are hosted in the king state, but just like refugees, and their own integration is not, despite of the fact that they are Serbs in Serbia, let's say, or Croatians in Croatia, but they are not accepted as citizens on equal basis. Still, they are treated as external subjects. What is this?
Just push
what?
any button. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter? It disappeared by itself? Oh, it disappeared. Everything is disappearing. I'm very sorry. Okay, I wanted to, just because I wanted to say about also very briefly about the other questions. As you know, the Albanian question, it remains unsettled. The Prime Minister of Albania several times, from both parties, the Democratic and the Socialist Party, under different conditions, clarified that the Albanians will join together within the European Union, and several times the European Union clarified that one thing is to have Albanians from two different states within the European Union, but this doesn't imply changing the borders. Like Austria and Germany, they speak the same language, they are Germans, but they are two different states. So they are two member states, they are not, because they are within the European Union, the same state. So this is something that, as you can imagine, any time when one Albanian Prime Minister mentions something about the future of the Union of the Albanians, this leads to great concerns in the neighboring countries. Then, in addition to that, you have also deeply division of Bosnia that I have mentioned, or even the tensions between Macedonia and Greece. You know that during these days they are negotiating several issues. One of them, this is regarding the name, whether Macedonia could be called Macedonia or not, because the Greek point of view is that the Macedonian culture belongs to the ancient Macedonian culture belongs to the Greek tradition and Greek legacy, and cannot be identified to the Slav population that came into the region in the 6th, 5th, 6th century of our era. So this is the reason why they are now negotiating a new name, or a name that can accommodate both sides. But the public opinions in both the countries are deeply divided. In Greece, for instance, all the, let's say, the polls say that if they go to a referendum, they would reject any agreement if the name Macedonia appears in. In Macedonia, the point is that the country is divided, because if you speak with the Slavo-Macedonians, you have a large reluctance, while the Albanians, that represented the 25% of the populations, are in favor to negotiate the changes of the name, because they would like the country to join NATO and the EU as fast as possible, because Albania is already in NATO and is negotiating the European Union membership. So this is just to explain to you how the public opinions are divided. It's a, let's say, a chess game from this point of view, really a chess game. And well, Croatia and Serbia both had unsettled accounts with Nazi collaborationists. Croatia with the Ustasha and the Serbs with the Chetniks. In both cases, the Ustasha and the Chetniks were allied of the Nazi. Well, actually, the Chetniks, at least at the beginning, from 1941 to 1943 were allied to Italy more than to the Germans. But where Italy and Germans, as you know, were allied. And I had the chance to see the diaries of the officers of the Italian army and the documents of the Italian army that are preserved into the archives in Rome, and they show, for instance, how much money Italy gave to the Chetnik troops, how much weapons they transferred to the Chetniks. So the Chetniks were supported by the fascists, and then after the Italian collapse in 1943, they were supported by the Germans. And for the Ustash, okay, I think that is meaningless to mention, but they were very close to the Nazi, to such an extent that they were the only ones, no Germans group that created also a concentration camp for killing Jews, Serbs, communists. So this is just to explain the unsettled issues. Then the ICTY and the post-war memories, this is exactly because the ICTY made a certain set of decisions. Like it or not, because the ICTY is a legal framework. And the legal framework is based on the legal evidences and the legal battles between lawyers and the defense, the prosecutor, and then the judges decide. There were lots of hopes that justice could lead to create the conditions for reconciliation. I would say this failed, despite of the fact that I collaborated with them and we had lots of discussion with this aspect of reconciliation, particularly with a judge that I funded, a lawyer. It was extremely interesting because he was from South Africa and he was in the Truth Commission involved. So he was involved in the Truth Commission, that he came for years in The Hague to work about the Radovan Karadzic case, and so he knew perfectly all the two situations, and despite all these documents and all the attempts that were, let's say, developed during these years, the way how the media and the policymakers reported to the population about all the decisions that were made, or the debates, for instance, that were reported into from the trials, were biased. Why, for instance? Well, in Croatia as well as in Serbia, the media reported only the position of the defense, and very rarely the position of the prosecutor. So this had a great impact on the public opinion, because they could not judge, and they, on the other hand, had the impression that the judges were biased, because the decision, the debate was based on the defense positions, and then maybe the final decision was the opposite. And this was considered a conclusion that was based without evidence. This happened in many cases, both in Croatia and in Serbia, and even with the Muslims, when in the few cases Muslims were also sentenced for crimes. So this is just to explain that why justice, for instance, that could have represented an opportunity for peace, actually didn't achieve the goal that was on the basis of these hopes. Now, since I explained the negative part, I would say also that there is a positive side. So there were attempts to establish reconciliation. One part, for instance, you can say the role of politics. The president of Serbia, Vučić, visited Srebrenica, where a genocide was committed during the war, and at least he met the organization of the mothers that and the widows that lost their own dears in 1995. It was a gesture, despite of the fact that he didn't use the word genocide, but he, in any case, recognized the responsibility of the Serbians for this crime. Then there was this very interesting. Very recently, the two presidents of Croatia and Serbia met. And they met in Croatia. And then after their own dialogue, at closed doors, when they spoke about the cooperation, particularly in the perspective of Serbia to join the European Union, the two presidents came for the debate, the press conference, and they admittedly said that they never spoke about the past. So they prefer to cancel any discussion about the past, because otherwise they could never achieve any kind of agreement. And they prefer to speak only about the future, forgetting completely the past. While on the squares, there were hundreds of people. They are protesting against the president of Serbia because they wanted him to recognize his responsibility for the past. And this explains to you this dimension, you know. Even the dialogue in Kosovo, with Kosovo, is very problematic between Serbia and the Albanian side, for instance. The fact that recently the head of one of the most prominent Serbian leaders, Oliver Ivanovic, was killed in Kosovo, it's unclear who was the responsible. But this led to certain tensions also within the Albanian parliament, the Kosovo parliament. So to such an extent that, for instance, the dialogue in this moment is blocked. And the dialogue has been negotiated by the European Union, but without achieving any substantial result, because the parliament in Pristina didn't vote, at least so far, the decision already achieved by the negotiators, including the Serbian side and the Kosovo side, to establish an autonomous area for the municipalities of northern Kosovo. And so this has not been ratified, and this is explained to you why this dialogue remains difficult. I don't want to just to mention again the Macedonian memories. As I mentioned, there is this attempt, for instance, to establish again an agreement about the name of the country. But the name of the country is also connected to the name of the language. How can you call a country or can change the name of a country without affecting the name of the language? And if it's so, you know, there was some gesture from the Macedonian side, for instance. They have renamed the airport. They have renamed the motorway, erasing any name of Alexander the Great as the Macedonian, because they didn't want to offend the Greek side any longer. Okay, but still, this is not enough. I would like just to mention to you, this was the civil society. Just let's set aside the politics. Civil society. There are lots of little attempts in the little society to reestablish a shared memory. Svetlana Broz wrote a wonderful book, in my view. I met her several times. We made with two Italian actors also a movie from this book, and my students from the different areas of the Balkans translated the actors, what the actors said in several languages, including Russian, Serbian, Croatian, Macedonian, yes, in German, in English. So we made a CD-ROM about this. Why? Because she recorded stories of people that ran the risk during the war to be killed, and for unknown reasons, persons of another ethnic group ran the risk to lose their life in order to save them. So this is a book of beautiful stories, because despite of the fact that, let's say, you have a Serbian, for instance, in Srebrenica, that saved the life of a number of women with his bus from the massacre in Srebrenica, or you have a Croatian that was saved by a Muslim, or there is a story by a Muslim that saved a Croatian family with the kids and so on and so forth. So she collected all these stories just to show that despite the war, despite the hatred, the ethnic cleansing, the violence, the rapes, there was a humanity that moved in a different direction. And this was something that was, in a sense, offered to the idea of reconciliation, and to such an extent that she wanted to reestablish, to create some sort of park of the just people, yes, like in Jerusalem. The politics didn't allow so far to do that. Textbooks has been revised many times. I know, for instance, a great job that has been done by a group of scholars from different countries, from Bulgaria, from Serbia, from Croatia, from Greece, from Macedonia, in Thessaloniki. They published 6 books on the history of the Balkans without bias, because all they work together. All these books are forbidden to be used as textbooks in the schools in the Balkans, because the State Commission didn't allow to use them because of the... So this is, as you understand, all these elements had a consequence on this. So what is the real impact? The real impact of all this, despite these efforts that were made, the real impact is minimum. And when you see, several times we have organized summer schools. We bring people from all the region of Yugoslavia outside the region, and we discussed their own issues. They became friends. They got even in love. They made children. But as soon as they came back to the country, they found again such an atmosphere, negative atmosphere, that either they accepted the context or they decided to leave forever the country. And this is explained to you why, at this point, what is the role at this point you can raise of the EU, since the EU offered to all these countries the possibility to be included within the European Union. This is my last slide, just to explain to you, because the European Union is the most involved country into the region, economically, financially, politically, culturally. Well, the EU didn't offer so far a clear pathway how to join the European Union. They said, when you will be ready. And the point is that the political aspects that I have mentioned before do not allow to achieve this goal. I give you another example, for instance. The European Union several times encouraged the policymakers into the region to make an economic custom union, economic trade, into the regional economic trade, in order to make stronger the economy, in order then to be competitive with the economy of the European Union. No way to be approved that. Only by words. Only they sign, they ratified, but concrete gesture to do that, no. Why? Because the political dimension said that the European Union wanted to re-establish Yugoslavia. So for this reason, or they said they wanted to create us, to put us in a ghetto. And so all these arguments are used in order not to make reforms. And so the situation remains as it is. So, for instance, the Berlin process encouraged now to create new infrastructures. Well, creating new infrastructure means particularly in the gas, oil pipelines, railways, motorways. This implies lots of money and lots of time. And the problem is that the region has no time. This is the big issue. Recently, this is a very interesting, if you wanted to download, there is this new document of February 2018 by the European Commission, where is reported, this is for the first time, the European Commission included in an official document like this, 1 page enough about reconciliation, by saying that they are ready to invest more money for, and even to double the money for the Erasmus Plus, that you know is the program for the mobility of the students within the region and between the region and the European Union. Now this is a proposal that has to be approved by the member states and then implemented after 2020. Again, this takes time. And what are the expectations in the Balkans? The expectations are lower and lower because they have to cope with difficulties, the difficulties of politics, the lack of economic development, unemployment, a very high brain drain, the trend of high-level students to leave the country. And despite of the fact that universities are trying desperately to develop some agreement with other universities for double diploma, for mobility of the students, but then when the students started to move, it's difficult that they come back again. And so this explains to you how when you go in the region, you had the impression to be in the mud. So in an area that is not changing, is not moving in any direction. And so just to conclude what is the regional future, my answer is I don't know. I don't know. Difficult to say, very problematic. I don't have here, you know, an story to tell you that is finishing. Well, despite the difficulties, in the end they achieved their own goals, like the Americans would like to hear, because they like us, the happy ends. For the moment, there are no happy ends, there are tensions, and if you speak with the people, there are no, if they move as individuals, or because they have their own ties, okay, this works. But for instance, even if you discover that, if somebody discovers that you have people from another states in their own country, they can react very negatively. For instance, it's still a problem for a Serb arriving with a car with the table of Belgrade, for instance, in Croatia. They run the risk to find the car destroyed during the night. I give you an example also that is very known. A famous scholar, Croatian scholar, Snježana Kortić, who is teaching in Germany. She published a book that was published in German and in that language, Croatian, Serbian, whatever you want to call it, Montenegrin or Bosnian, about the fact that that language is a shared language, is a multiple language, like a multipolar language, like English. You have the American English, the British English, the Australian English. So it's a language, a multipolar language, but it's just one language. And she was attacked very furiously by the members of the Academy of Science in Croatia. And for instance, when she's living in Zagreb, and one day in the morning she went out and she found her car completely destroyed. When people, certain people, you don't know who, but they are hooligans, they are and this creates tension. And this particularly the fact that even the past is not reconciled. I'm not speaking even the past of the 1990, but it's not reconciled the past of 1941, and even the past of 1918. So there is no reconciliation. There are so opposite narratives that this, let's say, influence so deeply than the context that even the generous work of different NGOs, organizations, or activities that then suffer from this political behavior, yes, that has an impact and creates an area of insecurity and instability into Europe. And this area of security and instability in Europe, as scholars of international relations, as you know, cannot last forever. Either finds a way to stabilize, or otherwise new war erupted. There are no way. This is a clear historical dimension, and that is what remains unsettled. And we'll see in the next future. So this is the reason why very often this is an area that is forgotten. Thinking that since they would like to join the European Union, more or less, at a certain point, they will close all their own problems and stability will be achieved. And this is not exactly the same issue that you can imagine. Slovenia and Croatia are both members of the EU and both members of NATO. And they have problems with the borders, without speaking about Greece and Turkey. Turkey is not within the EU, but both are in the NATO. And so this is explained to you that to a certain extent is some sort of illusion of the Western world that expanding the institutions, if they remain weak, they can achieve the stability. This, just to conclude, one of the key points for the establishment of the European Union was the reconciliation between France and Germany. This is what Jean Monnet, De Gasperi, and other people wanted to achieve at the beginning in the 50s. This worked and is still working into the Western side. But the same rationality is not applied in other areas of Europe yet. And this is something that creates particularly a context of insecurity that remains and reproduces itself. And for instance, even the wave of the migrants that came through the Balkan route, for instance, didn't help in increasing this sense of security. Even worse, increased the sense of insecurity. So this leave the context to different inputs that can arrive from different sides, and leave the area into, I would say, into a context where, at least for the moment, reconciliation has failed, has not been achieved, and this can have a great impact on the future of the region, but also on the future of Europe, as this is a part of Europe, and the European Union is surrounding this area. And this is something that leave the continent to a status of uncertainty that is detrimental for the consolidation of peace. And stop here. Thank you for your attention.